So you got a camera and you want to get it off auto mode, well, you're in luck. By the end of this video, you'll know everything you need to know to be shooting on manual mode. So let's get going. So to shoot on manual mode, there are 3 settings you have to know. That's going to be your shutter speed, your aperture, and your ISO. All 3 of these affect your exposure, but they also have a secondary effect, so you have to understand each one of them. Let's get started with shutter speed. So your shutter speed is exactly what it sounds like. It's the speed of your shutter, how fast it opens and closes, and how long your sensor is exposed to light. However long your sensor is exposed to light, it's going to determine how bright or dark your photo is going to be, but it's also going to determine the amount of motion that is captured in that photo. This number is usually displayed as a fraction and represents the fraction of the second that shutter is going to be open for. So the larger the denominator is, the darker the photo is going to be, and the less motion that's captured in that. What do I mean by capturing motion? So the longer your shutter is open, the larger the chance of motion blur occurring in the picture is. Here are 3 reference photos. These were taken at 1/60, 1/125, and 1/400. As you can see, the smaller that denominator is, the more motion was captured in that photo. So shutter speed, the larger the denominator is, the less motion that is captured and the darker that picture is going to be. There's a lot more to shutter speed, but that's all you need to know to understand and use the settings. So let's move on to aperture. Your f-stop or aperture is a numerical representation of how wide the opening on your camera lens is and how much light can get into your sensor. Plain and simple, lower the number, bigger the opening, the more light is in the picture. So an f2.8 is going to be way brighter than an f14. A larger opening also means a more shallow depth of field. So the lower your f-stop is, the less of your image is going to be in focus. As an example, here's 2 pictures, one taken at f1.8 and one taken at f14. You can see that the one taken at f14 has much more in focus, and the one taken at 1.8 has a smooth, buttery foreground and background. That blurrier foreground and background is called bokeh, and you will be in pursuit of it for the rest of your life. Aperture is extremely important to know because each lens can only stop down so far, so when you're purchasing lenses, you'll have to be able to recognize how low that aperture can go and how low you need that aperture to go for what you're shooting. So if you're shooting lots of low light situations, you want a lens like a 2.8 or a 1.8 that can let a lot more light in. If you're shooting landscapes, you mainly just want to focus on keeping your f-stop around 14 to 18, making sure everything in that photo is in focus, so it doesn't really matter how far your lenses can stop down. So our aperture is controlling how much light can get in and what the depth of field of our image is going to be. There's a lot more to aperture as well, but that's what you need to understand to shoot with it effectively. Let's get on to ISO. ISO is the easiest one to understand. Bigger number, brighter picture. It is simply the amount of artificial light you are putting into that photo. Usually you just set your ISO after you set your other 2 settings to get the picture how you want it and then properly expose it with your ISO. The only thing you have to be wary of is that the higher your ISO is, the more grain is going to be introduced into that picture. As an example, here's 2 photos I took, one at ISO 200 and one at ISO 52,400. You can see this one has substantially more grain in it, but an impressively low amount for 52,400. Modern cameras can handle ISO much better than older cameras could. My first camera could not handle it at all, so if I bumped it over like 1600, my pictures would start to grain out. If you have a cheaper camera, this is something that you want to be wary of and will become an issue if you overuse your ISO. So sometimes you just need to sacrifice your shutter or aperture a little bit to make sure your picture is not way too grainy to be used. So main points from your ISO is your artificial light and your grain. Only things you gotta worry about. So to wrap everything up, basically your shutter speed is the amount of time your sensor is being exposed and the amount of motion you're capturing in that picture. Your aperture is how wide your lens opening is and how big your depth of field is. Your ISO is controlling the amount of artificial light you put in and the amount of grain that you are introducing into that photo. This was a super quick, simple overview. If you want something more in depth, hit that subscribe button. I'm about to be making a video on each one of these settings individually and going as in depth as you can to get the fullest understanding of each of them. I hope you all have an amazing day. I hope you take beautiful pictures and create amazing videos. I love each and every one of you. Like and subscribe. Deuces.